Fort Ridgeway's main training hall buzzed with the loud energy only overconfident new recruits could generate. Chairs scraped, boots thumped, and groups of mixed, military hopefuls filled the air with jokes and boasts. Army Rangers compared march times with Marines. Air Force members playfully teased Navy recruits about finding their way on land, and a casual arrogance filled the entire space, as if they already understood the demanding world they had just entered. Against one wall, a small woman sat alone at a simple folding desk. Her pencil quietly moved across a notepad for the required warm-up of spatial drawing. Her sleeves were pushed up just enough to show uneven tattoos on her arms, jagged shapes, rough lines, marks that seemed more like quick, unplanned scribbles than any real design. She stayed silent. She didn't look around. She simply kept working. Sergeant Cole Maddox noticed her first. Corporal Brett Kinley and Airman Tyler Boone soon followed, amusement already growing between them. "Looks like art class sent us a helper," Boone mumbled. Kinley snickered. "Those tattoos look like a kid's doodle." She lifted her eyes once. "You have no idea what you're seeing." For a split second, Boone froze. Then he laughed it off. Lieutenant Dana Rowan sat with her shoulders relaxed, as if the commotion around her had nothing to do with her. Her elbows rested gently on the desk, her hands steady on the pad. Every movement was controlled and unhurried, a quiet calm that didn't need attention to exist. From across the room she looked like any ordinary support staff the unit might have called in at the last minute. She displayed no rank, no unit badges, no specialized gear like a laser rangefinder or headset to suggest she belonged with active operators. Just a plain black t-shirt, simple running shoes, and a well-used notebook. Her hair was tied back in a basic knot that made no statement at all. No dramatic cuts, no bright streaks, nothing that said she wanted to be remembered. A few stray strands had fallen by her temple, but she didn't push them away. She let them stay and kept drawing on the page. What truly drew the eye, what held people's gaze the longer they looked, were the tattoos. They wrapped along her forearms in uneven paths, stopping and starting as if someone had tried to sketch with the wrong hand in the dark and never bothered to fix the lines. There were no clean shapes, no shaded flags, no skulls or eagles. One mark looked like a broken ladder. Another resembled a bent arrow that never quite found a straight path. Near her wrist, a cluster of tiny shapes overlapped, more like a map that had been erased and redrawn in the same spot too many times. The ink didn't shout pride. It looked like someone trying desperately not to forget something. To the recruits it came across as random chaos. They saw no pattern, no artwork, nothing that matched the polished sleeves some of them wore, carefully done at shops near big bases after long deployments. They chose to believe what made sense to them. Messy tattoos meant a messy person. A messy person, they thought, meant not one of them. Sergeant Cole Maddox thrived on such quick judgments. He was tall, lean, and carried himself with the confidence many high performers did before real life had a chance to humble them. His voice easily carried above the others, and a small group was always ready to laugh at anything he said. He loved winning, and he loved being seen winning. Ruck marches, timed runs, shoot-house drills. It didn't matter if there was an official scoreboard somewhere. He wanted his name near the top. Beneath that constant drive lay a thin layer of unease he would never admit. If he wasn't the best, who was he? Corporal Brett Kinley walked a half step behind Cole, out of habit. He had learned that staying close to the loudest man in the room was an easy way to avoid becoming the target of the next joke. He rarely started the comments, but he kept them alive, adding a quick line here and there to get another laugh. Kinley watched people the way some Marines watched terrain. He could tell who was likely to push back and who would simply keep their head down. Dana looked like someone who wouldn't fight back. To him, that made her safe to tease. It made her part of the backdrop, not part of the conflict. Airman Tyler Boone was the one who first spotted the tattoos and decided they were funny. He had the restless energy of someone still trying to prove he belonged with ground units. Talking helped him fill gaps where his confidence was thin. If the room laughed with him, he could ignore the small doubts in his own chest. Boone was the type who had spent more time on firing ranges and in simulation rooms than in actual combat. He wanted the respect that came with experience he didn't yet have. Picking an easy target was his way of pretending the gap was smaller than it felt. At the edge of that same space, Private Elena Ward watched everything without drawing attention to herself. She was young, new, and still learning the unspoken rules of how people behaved in places like that. She sat with other army soldiers but leaned slightly away from them, not fully inside their circle. Elena saw the tattoos and thought they looked strange, but something in the way the woman sat bothered her. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger. It was the way her shoulders never hunched, even when the jokes started. The way her hands didn't fidget, the way her eyes stayed clear and focused on the page. Dana didn't flinch when the first remarks came. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't sigh, didn't give away even a hint of irritation. She simply paused long enough to let the noise wash over her, then resumed her drawing with the same steady pressure of pencil against paper. Once, when the laughter swelled for a moment, she adjusted her sleeve, pulling it down a little, not to hide the ink, but to cover a spot where the lines grew thicker and darker. The gesture was small and almost weary, like someone closing a door they had already closed 100 times before. Her face held no smirk, no forced smile. Her expression was flat but not empty. There was a distant look in her eyes that didn't match the room. She didn't appear bored. She looked like someone whose mind lived in places none of these young men had ever walked. From the outside, all the recruits saw was a small, lean woman without rank showing, sitting where support staff usually sat. They filled the silence around her with their own stories. Maybe she worked logistics. Maybe she handled paperwork. Maybe she was there to take notes for the instructor. Their assumptions came from the gaps in their knowledge, not from anything she actually did. They couldn't see the retired trident that had once rested on her chest. They didn't know about the years she had carried a rifle in places that didn't have air conditioning or pre-mission safety briefing. To them, she was an empty canvas, so they painted their own version of her. Dana kept her focus on the notepad. The lines she drew were not random. Each shape matched something only she recognized. A courtyard, a narrow alley, a pattern of walls seen once from a rooftop under a different sky. She wasn't sitting there as a mere spectator. She was sitting there as someone assessing a new environment with deeply ingrained habits. If you had walked into the hall at that moment, you might have missed her entirely. Your eyes would have been pulled to the louder group, to Cole's easy laugh, to Boone's quick comments, to Kinley's smirks. The woman at the folding desk would have seemed like mere background noise. Yet, if you had stopped and truly watched, you would have noticed how still her breathing remained, how her gaze moved when no one was looking, how her hands never trembled, even under the attention she did not ask for. Calm didn't cling to her, it lived within her. What would you have done in that moment? Master Chief Rowan Harker stepped into the hall with the kind of presence that didn't need to be announced. Conversations fell silent on their own, not out of fear but out of instinct. He wore simple navy khakis, sleeves rolled just enough to show the sun-worn creases of a man who had spent more of his career outside than in offices. He carried a clipboard, though everyone in the room knew he didn't need it. Harker never relied on paper to judge a person. He read people the way other instructors read field manuals. He let the silence settle before speaking. His voice carried easily, calm and steady, like someone who had seen every version of a training hall and every type of recruit. Today's assessment has 3 parts, he said. Strength, cognitive pressure, tactical analysis. You'll complete them in that order. Some recruits nodded along, already sizing up the competition. Cole Maddox cracked his knuckles. Brett Kinley leaned forward with a grin. Tyler Boone elbowed the man next to him, as if preparing for a performance. They expected the strongest in the room to be called first. Someone loud, someone eager. Harker lowered his eyes to the clipboard, paused for only a breath, then lifted his head again. Rowan. The laughter came instantly. A few chuckles at first, then louder when people realized he was serious. Dana did not react. She closed her notebook, placed it neatly on the desk, and stood with quiet purpose. No sigh, no hesitation. She stepped forward like someone walking into a familiar hallway. Cole whispered, "This is going to be good," and shook his head. She stepped into the open space. Harker gestured toward the first station, a weighted casualty drag with a full-size, sand-filled dummy shaped like a downed operator. Other recruits had struggled with it earlier in the week, some barely pulling it more than a few yards before their form collapsed. Dana approached it without stretching or adjusting her grip. She crouched, secured her hands under the dummy's harness, and lifted. Her body moved with clean mechanics, no wasted motion. Without a word, she began the drag. The dummy slid across the concrete with steady progress, faster than anyone expected. Her steps stayed even. Her breathing remained controlled. She didn't gasp, didn't grimace, didn't show any strain except a slight tightening in her jaw near the halfway mark. She finished the course in a time that would have placed her near the top of the entire class. No celebration, no moment of triumph. She simply released the dummy gently onto the floor and stepped back. Cole's grin faded halfway into a frown. Kinley blinked twice, as if replaying what he had just seen. Boone looked around for someone to confirm the time wasn't fake. Harker recorded her score without expression. The room stayed unusually quiet as he pointed her to the second station. Cognitive pressure. This station was designed to overwhelm even skilled operators. A shifting pattern grid, projected on a screen, flashing symbols, numbers, and changing sequences under a deafening wall of white noise, pumped through overhead speakers. The objective was simple: identify the pattern before the sequence collapsed. Dana stood in front of the screen, shoulders squared, eyes steady. Harker whispered something to the technician. The volume rose until recruits in the back winced and covered their ears. The grid began its first rotation. Dana did not flinch. Her gaze snapped between symbols with surgical precision. Her fingers brushed slightly against her leg in a rhythm that looked practiced, almost like counting breaths between gunfire. The rotation grew faster. She leaned in a fraction, tracking a cascading shift across the right side of the grid. Then she pressed the panel. Correct, the room murmured. Boone muttered, no way she got that, but offered nothing else. The next sequence came. More symbols, more noise, more distractions built into the task to break focus. Dana stayed centered, not blinking while the projection scrambled into impossible shapes. She pressed the panel again. Correct. By the fourth cycle, most recruits were watching her instead of the demonstration screen. Cole's arms were crossed now, elbows tight against his ribs. Kinley no longer smiled. Elena Ward stood still near the back, barely breathing. Dana finished the puzzle with flawless accuracy. Not a single miss. The technician lowered the noise. The hall buzzed with whispers. Someone stepped backward, bumping into a chair without noticing. Harker nodded once and motioned her toward the last station. Drone footage. Tactical flaw recognition. On the screen, gray surveillance imagery played over a simulated walled compound with narrow alleys, rooftops, and partial obstructions. The recruits had practiced on similar footage the day before. It usually took them minutes to identify blind spots or fatal funnels. Dana watched the first few seconds of footage without moving. Then she raised her hand slightly. There, she said. Cole muttered, she's just guessing. Dana pointed toward a corner of the rooftop, tracing a pattern in the air with her fingertip as though she had walked that route before. She named the flaw instantly. A staggered shadow angle created when a sentry turned away too early. Harker asked, explain it. Her voice carried no pride. That rhythm is wrong, it repeats. It's the same pattern we saw in a desert city many years ago. Those words, desert city, changed the air in the room, not because they were dramatic, but because they didn't sound theoretical. They sounded lived. Dana continued, marking the breach path and the blind approach where a team could be ambushed without realizing it. Every line she traced matched real-world conditions far beyond standard training. Recruits exchanged looks, trying to make sense of the ease with which she dissected the footage. Boone stepped back without meaning to. Kinley opened his mouth but found nothing to say. Cole looked at the screen as if it had betrayed him. Whispers replaced laughter. Uneasy, thin whispers. Some recruits leaned away from her as if they had misjudged the shape of something dangerous. The tension stretched. Would you have stayed quiet or stood up for her? Master Chief Harker did not interrupt. He stood with one hand behind his back, observing Dana with the kind of stillness one used when watching something familiar unfold. He knew what he was seeing. She completed each task not with the excitement of a student, but with the memory of someone who had done all of this under circumstances far harsher than a clean haul at Fort Ridgeway. She finished the analysis, stepped back from the screen and lowered her hand to her side. There was no tremor, no rush of adrenaline, no breath of relief. She looked exactly as she had before the assessment started. Calm, centered, present. Harker gave a small nod. It was not praise, it was recognition. The room remained silent, not respectful yet, just confused. And somewhere in that silence, a slow understanding began. Dana stepped back from the tactical screen, letting her arms fall to her sides in the same steady way she had done everything so far. When she shifted her weight, her left wrist turned just enough for the overhead lights to catch on a thin, pale scar that ran along the bone. It wasn't new. It had that worn, settled look that comes from years, not months. A few recruits caught sight of it, but no one said anything. It didn't fit any of the stories they had built about her. Scars like that came from more than gym accidents or field exercises. Dana reached down to move a crate of simulation gear out of the way. As she did, her collar tugged and a sliver of fabric flashed into view. Private Elena Ward, standing near the sidewall, saw it clearly. A small, sun-faded patch sewn into the inside corner of Dana's PT shirt. The stitching was old, almost frayed. The symbol was tiny, barely there, but unmistakable to anyone who knew where to look. A trident, not the clean, polished kind recruits bought from base stores for display. This one looked worn down by heat, sand, and long nights spent under gear. Elena blinked, unsure whether she had imagined it. When Dana straightened, the collar fell back into place, hiding it again. Elena didn't. Her heart moved once in her chest, a sharp, quiet thud. She didn't know what it meant for certain, but she knew it was not something a logistics volunteer would be wearing. Dana lifted the crate with smooth precision. No hitches, no hesitation. Her stance remained balanced, her feet placed exactly the way a person trained to move under weight would stand. She turned her body in a narrow motion that avoided bumping the nearby recruits, using just enough space and no more. The movement was automatic, not the kind of adjustment someone learned from casual gym work. It was the unconscious efficiency of someone who had spent years avoiding unnecessary noise or exposure. Cole Maddox watched her, arms crossed tight. He tried to keep a smirk on his face, but something in his jaw shifted every time she moved. It bothered him, though he couldn't say why. People weren't supposed to look that natural doing things they hadn't been trained for, but she did. She moved like someone who didn't have to think about it anymore. Corporal Brett Kinley stood closer. He leaned in slightly, pretending to fuss with the training belt on the table. He wanted to hear if she said anything under her breath. Dana bent down to adjust the crate's corner, and in that quiet pocket of noise between stations, Kinley heard her murmur a short string of words. It wasn't English. It wasn't Spanish. It wasn't anything he had heard used casually. It was cadence shorthand, old SEAL shorthand, a clipped rhythm used during coordinated movement when radios were compromised. Only a handful of communities still recognized pieces of it. He had heard an instructor use it once as a joke years ago, saying they didn't teach it anymore because too many people misused it. Dana's tone had not sounded like a joke. Kinley's eyes widened just a fraction. He looked around to see if anyone else had caught it. Boone looked confused. Cole looked annoyed. Elena looked like she was quietly fitting puzzle pieces together. Kinley swallowed and stepped back. He didn't repeat what he heard. He didn't even tell Boone. Something in him understood that if he said it out loud, everything would shift too quickly, and he wasn't ready for that shift yet. Master Chief Harker moved closer, not to intervene, but to observe. He kept his expression neutral, hands clasped behind his back. Someone in the crowd finally worked up the nerve to speak. "Master Chief," a Marine started. "Who is she really?" Harker didn't answer. He only raised an eyebrow, an almost dismissive gesture that meant the question wasn't worth acknowledging. The Marine shrank back. Harker's silence carried weight. If he didn't want to explain, the room knew better than to press. Dana continued her movements, quiet and steady. Each gesture added another crack in the assumptions people had made about her. When she lifted a stack of weighted sandbags and set them down with controlled ease, several recruits stepped aside without being asked. Her body language didn't demand space, but they gave it anyway. Whispers rose like steam off pavement, soft, unsure. "That scar, did you see?" "She shouldn't know that pattern. What was that patch?" Kinley whispered. "She said something. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't normal." Boone shook his head. "Man, This is getting weird. Cole tried to dismiss them with a low laugh, but even he kept glancing over his shoulder. Dana didn't look like a threat. She didn't look like anything they had a category for. That made it worse. Unknown things always did. Elena remained quiet. She studied the way Dana breathed. Slow, steady, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Not labored, not straight. It reminded Elena of the breathing techniques her uncle, a former operator, had shown her when she was a teenager. Techniques meant for stabilizing aim at long distances or resetting focus after clearing a room. The clues began stacking themselves one over another, until the pile grew too high to ignore. But still, no one stepped forward. No one asked Dana directly. No one wanted to be the one who pushed too far and found out something they weren't ready to hear. Harker gave no answers. Dana offered none, and in the silence between them, the silence of two people who understood each other without speaking, only deepened the mystery. Tension moved through the hall like a slow current, the kind that lifted the hairs on your arms even before your mind understood why. Nobody laughed now. Nobody mocked. Nobody dared to look her in the eye for too long. She had lived all of this before, and without meaning to, she was letting the room see just enough of it to feel the weight of what they didn't know. And the more they saw, the less any of them trusted their own assumption. The announcement for the next phase came without warning. One moment the recruits were spreading out across the hall, resetting gear from the earlier assessments, and the next, Master Chief Harker's voice cut through the noise with a firm, steady command. Form teams, you have a live scenario. The screen at the front of the room flickered to life, showing an overhead layout of a walled compound. The drone footage was stale gray, grainy, and brutally simple. A courtyard, 2 narrow alleys, 3 rooftop positions, and a single entrance that had been intentionally blurred to hide depth. It was the kind of footage used to test judgment rather than technical skill. Harker tapped the screen. Your job is to identify the critical breach point. You will have only a few minutes. Choose wrong, and in real conditions your entire team would be gone before stepping inside. The recruits straightened as adrenaline moved through the room. These scenarios, tactical puzzles, competitions, this was where most of them felt comfortable again. They had watched Dana Rowan dominate the individual tasks, but a team exercise was something they believed could tilt the balance back toward them. Teams formed quickly. Cole Maddox pulled Brett Kinley and Tyler Boone with him, confident they could outmaneuver anyone else. Elena Ward circled toward them, hoping to join, but Cole waved her off. Stick with the other Army group, he said. We've got this covered. Dana stepped forward on her own, not pairing with anyone. She simply walked toward the screen and waited. Cole glanced over his shoulder, scoffed under his breath, and turned back to the layout. All right, he said loudly. Let's show how this is done. The timer began. Cole leaned in, tapping a spot on the right side of the map. There, that's the breach point. Shadows show a covered entry. Easiest place for us to push. Kinley nodded quickly, wanting to stay aligned with his partner. Boone immediately started explaining how they would angle through the choke point, without even verifying the detail. Dana remained still. Harker said nothing. The room's hum faded into anticipation. Cole stepped forward with the confidence of someone used to taking charge. Master Chief, that's our answer. Harker didn't respond. He looked at Dana instead. Cole frowned. What? You want her to speak? Dana didn't wait for his permission. She moved to the edge of the screen and traced a path with her fingertip, not touching the monitor, just marking an invisible line above it. Her path didn't lead to Cole's chosen entry. It moved left, then angled sharply into a shadowed corner near a damaged rooftop beam. That is your critical breach point, she said quietly. Boone let out a breathy laugh. That dark corner? That's the worst angle possible. Kinley agreed. You'd be exposed there. Dana reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded notepad, the same one she'd been sketching in earlier. She clicked her pencil and drew a small crooked symbol on the paper, a downward mark intersected by 3 short horizontal lines. It looked crude, like something copied from memory rather than designed. She held it up. The symbol was identical to the one tattooed just above her left forearm. The room went silent. Cole's expression tightened, irritation shifting into confusion. What does that have to do with anything? Dana kept her eyes on the map. Everything, she said softly. That symbol means that the left corner is a false approach. The enemy waits on the right because the left looks too easy. But this pattern here, she pointed to the slightly discolored rooftop, shows weight distribution. Someone has moved along this edge repeatedly. They are using this as a funnel, not a guard position. No one spoke. She continued, her voice steady but low. In a desert city many years ago, we misread a breach like this. The shadows hid the stagger. Our team chose the wrong side. Her pencil tapped the crooked symbol again. We used this mark to warn others later. 3 operators almost died because the pattern didn't look wrong at first glance. It looked efficient. It looked familiar. But familiarity kills when you assume instead of confirm. Her voice trembled barely, but enough for the nearest recruits to feel it. Cole Maddox took a slow, involuntary step back. Kinley swallowed hard, the earlier jokes draining from his face. Boone's eyes stayed locked on the rough symbol as though seeing it for the first time, despite all the times he had laughed at it. Dana set the notepad down on the table. Her hand lingered over the drawing for a long moment before she pulled it away. The pencil line wasn't straight. It wavered slightly, as if her hand remembered drawing it under harder circumstances. Darkness, noise, sand, danger pressing in too close. Master Chief Harker finally spoke. Rowan is correct. He didn't explain how she knew. He didn't explain why she knew. He didn't explain what many years ago meant. He didn't have to. The recruits felt it. Something heavy, something human, something earned. Cole tried to rally himself. It was just a lucky guess, he said weakly. Dana turned her gaze toward him. Not harsh, not judgmental, just steady. That symbol is not luck, she said. It was carved into a wall after the operation. Later it became ink. Not for pride, for memory. Her eyes shifted back to the screen. The kind of memory you don't decorate. The room absorbed that line, letting it sink like a weight into the air. Elena Ward's breath caught. She looked at Dana's tattoos again. Every crooked line, every odd angle, every cramped mark. They weren't random. They weren't messy. They were not drawn for show. They were warnings, lessons, coordinates of the path. Dana reached for the tactical tool on the table, adjusting it with a precise movement. The recruits could now see the pattern behind her posture. Every shift of her foot, every rotation of her shoulder, every breath timed as if she had done it under fire and learned to survive by repeating it exactly the same way. Kinley looked at his teammates and whispered, "They're not tattooed." Boone nodded slowly. "They're maps." Elena felt something cold move down her arms. "They're moments," she whispered to no one in particular. Something she lived. Still, no one asked the question forming in every mind. Who are you? Because asking would mean accepting the possibility that the quiet woman they mocked, laughed at, dismissed, surrounded like she was nothing, was someone they were not prepared to understand. Dana's voice softened as she finished explaining the breach flaw. You learn to mark danger where it hides, not where it shouts. Cole's arrogance drained, replaced by the first uncomfortable gap in his confidence he couldn't fill with jokes. He stared at the symbol again, realizing it did not look like a decoration anymore. It looked like something carried through fire. Master Chief Harker stepped forward. Teams, your score for this scenario will be based on accuracy, not assumption. Some of you need to learn the difference. His glance toward Cole was brief, but it landed. Dana said nothing else. She placed the notepad back into her pocket, folding it carefully as though it carried more weight than its size suggested. The recruits didn't dare speak. They only watched her with a kind of stunned recalibration, the same way a soldier sees a silhouette in the distance and realizes it is not a shadow, but something far more significant. This was the first crack in the wall around her past, and everyone felt it. The tattoos were no longer jokes. They were history. They were warning. They were survival written in ink. But even with that truth beginning to surface, one thing remained untouched. No one still knew who she truly was. The hall door opened with a solid, measured push, and every recruit who recognized the silhouette straightened instinctively. Commander Adrian Lockock stepped inside. The kind of man whose presence carried farther than his voice. His reputation moved ahead of him in every special operations circle, A leader whose word had weight from Coronado to Bragg to Dam Neck. Even Cole Maddox, who rarely went quiet, lowered his shoulders without realizing it. Locke started speaking before he fully entered, addressing Master Chief Harker about the next rotation. But mid-sentence his voice thinned. His eyes caught on the woman standing near the screen, the notepad still tucked in her hand. He stopped walking. He stopped talking. The room fell into a silence so complete that even the air seemed to pause. Locke's expression shifted in a way the recruits had never seen. A quiet shock softened by recognition, and then something close to respect. He stepped toward her, not fast, not slow, but with intention. Dana Rowan turned slightly to face him, her posture steady, almost resigned, like someone who had hoped this moment might not come, but was prepared for it anyway. What happened next was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone who had served long enough to know the difference. Locke inclined his head just a few degrees. Not a bow, not a salute, but the gesture of one operator, acknowledging another who had earned it in places no one here had ever stood. Lieutenant Dana Rowan, Locke said, his voice carrying across the hall without effort. 17 years Naval Special Warfare. No one moved. Recon sniper, he continued. Tier 1 assignments. 0 team casualties under her instruction. It hit the room like a wave. Maddox stepped back so fast he nearly bumped into the table behind, the blood draining from his face as if someone had pulled the floor out from under him. The arrogance he wore like armor cracked in a single breath. Kinley's jaw hung open. No words came out. He stared at her as if she had transformed into a different person right in front of him, even though she had not changed at all. Boone's eyes dropped to her tattoos, the same rough lines he had laughed at earlier, and saw them differently now. Not messy, not random, not child. They looked heavier, older, real. Elena Ward lowered her head for just a moment, not out of fear, but out of something closer to understanding. She wasn't surprised. Not really. The clues had been there, woven into Dana's posture, her silence, her precision. Elena felt her throat tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. Locke held Dana's gaze for another second. The hall wrapped in stillness around them. It was not awe, not ceremony, but recognition, the kind that only came from surviving the same kind of nights, breathing the same sand, carrying the same memories. Dana didn't speak. She didn't nod. She didn't look proud. She simply stood there, quiet and steady, revealing nothing and confirming everything, and the room finally understood who they had mocked. Commander Locke let the silence settle before he spoke again. His eyes remained on Dana, not with admiration, but with the sober recognition of someone who knew exactly what her years had cost. When he finally began, his tone was even, and matter of fact, as if he were reading a weather report instead of describing a night most people wouldn't survive. There was an operation, he said quietly, deep inside the eastern corridor, no air support, no extraction window, and no margin for error. The recruits listened without blinking. Even the air in the room felt still. A high-value hostage had escaped a cell and was running blind through hostile territory. The only team close enough to reach him was hers. Locke folded his hands behind his back. During the movement, Lieutenant Rowan fractured her ankle on a collapsed ravine edge. Bad break, the kind that should have ended her part of the operation immediately. A ripple of shock moved through the room. None of the recruits spoke. None dared. She refused medevac. Locke continued. A helicopter would have given away the hostage's last known direction, so she splinted her ankle with a cleaning rod and paracord, then walked miles through hostile ground. No sleep, no light, no backup. Cole Maddox shifted, his face pale. Kinley swallowed hard. Boone's mouth hung open. Locke's voice stayed calm. She reached the hostage, stabilized him, and kept moving. Every mile carried a higher risk of discovery, but she delivered him alive, and the intelligence he carried prevented an attack that would have taken hundreds of innocent lives. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize anything. The weight came from the truth, not the telling. Dana looked at the floor while he spoke, as if remembering a path she'd rather forget. No pride, no deflection, just a quiet acceptance of facts she wished didn't matter. Master Chief Harker stepped forward. He had remained silent through the entire reveal, watching Dana with the kind of stillness that came from deep respect. Harker had trained hundreds of operators. He had broken down and rebuilt more warriors than anyone in the building. He didn't give gestures lightly. He stopped in front of her. For a moment, no one knew what would happen. Harker never saluted in the middle of a training hall. Never. That kind of acknowledgement was reserved for men and women who had earned distinction under fire, not inside a classroom. Then he lifted his hand slowly, deliberately, a full formal salute. The recruits froze. Some drew in a breath too sharply. Others forgot to breathe at all. The hall felt like a sealed chamber where sound no longer existed. Dana looked up at him, her eyes softened, a quiet, humble recognition of respect she did not ask for. She returned the salute, her hand steady despite the emotions pressing behind her expression. When she lowered her hand again, the room had changed. Her tattoos no longer looked like odd scraps of ink. They no longer looked like chaotic lines or childish symbols. The recruits saw what they truly were, markers left by survival, shaped by nights most people would never know, burned into skin, not for display, but for memory. Boone stared as if seeing through time itself. Kinley felt his stomach twist with something close to guilt. Cole looked down at his boots, unable to meet her eyes. Elena Ward watched with quiet awe, tears threatening, but never falling. Dana didn't move toward the center of the room. She didn't thank anyone. She didn't shift her posture to absorb the attention or the reverence. She simply let her hands fall back to her sides and breathed out slowly, grounding herself. The salute ended, but its echo stayed in every corner of the hall. For the first time, the recruits understood what real respect felt like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't bragged about. It didn't live in stories told around tables. It lived in moments like this, when a room full of people finally recognized the courage that had been standing quietly among them all along. Dana stepped out of the hall the moment the debrief ended. No lingering, no accepting the stunned looks or the quiet apologies forming on a few faces. She moved with the same steady calm she had carried all day, slipping through the doorway like someone who'd learned long ago that praise was just another kind of noise. The evening air outside was cool, brushing lightly across her face as the door closed behind her. She walked toward the far edge of the courtyard, the sky tinted with the last trace of daylight. Her steps were soft, almost soundless on the concrete. She looked as though she wanted nothing more than distance from the weight of all those watching eyes. It wasn't humility, it wasn't discomfort, it was a kind of practiced withdrawal, the instinct of someone used to leaving rooms quietly after the truth caught up to them. "Ma'am," a voice called from behind. Dana stopped, turning her head slightly. Private Elena Ward jogged the last few steps to reach her, breathing a little harder than she meant to. She wasn't sure what she planned to say until she was standing there, staring at the tattoos she had spent the whole day trying to understand. Elena's voice softened. "Do they ever stop hurting?" Dana looked down at her forearm. Her fingers brushed one of the rough, crooked marks as if reading it like a word carved in wood. The movement was gentle, not mournful, but something in her eyes pulled the world a little quieter. "They only hurt," Dana said, "when I forget why I carry them." Elena nodded slowly, the meaning sinking deeper than she expected. The marks weren't reminders of pain, they were anchors, pieces of truth someone had chosen to keep rather than bury, and they were carried alone, without complaint, without explanation, until the world forced them into the open. Dana gave a small nod in return, a soft acknowledgement, then continued walking. Elena remained where she stood, watching her fade into the dimming light. For the first time all day, Elena understood what she had sensed from the beginning. It wasn't mystery, it wasn't danger, it was the kind that reshapes a person quietly without ever asking for recognition. Respect, she realized, wasn't loud. It wasn't earned through volume or muscle or the sharp edge of confidence. It came from what a person had survived when no one else was there to witness it. True strength is often quiet. True courage rarely announces itself, and sometimes the legend in the room is the one you laughed at first. Courage looks different on everyone. Some wear their battles openly, visible in the way they stand or speak. Others carry their history quietly in the shadows of memory, In marks they never explain unless someone truly needs to understand. And every once in a while, someone like Lieutenant Dana Rowan steps into a room and reminds us why humility matters, why silence can hold more truth than any story spoken out loud. Her strength didn't need a stage. It revealed itself only when the moment required it, leaving everyone who witnessed it a little different than before.